Welcome. We are here at Funding the Commons and Earth Commons in Berkeley. This is a panel all about Gitcoin Grants Round 20 with Kevin Owocki, Jon Ruth, and Benjamin Life. Thanks, guys, for doing this.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Owocki. Just help us frame. You're the founder of Gitcoin. What is Gitcoin? What are the grants rounds? And what's exciting you about Grants Round 20?
Yeah. Well, Gitcoin's a place where you can get coins if you're working on important causes in the community. And Gitcoin Grants is our quarterly rounds in which we raise a matching pool and we invite people who are doing meaningful work in the community to register their projects and receive contributions not only from the crowd and from their matching pool. So the reason why Gitcoin Grants Round 20 is called Round 20 is because it's the 20th that we've run. Every time we run these rounds, we try to get a little bit better at running them and try to hone the mechanism for distributing the routing. We try to hone the distribution of the funds to be a little bit better and to make the software a little bit better. So this has been a really amazing journey to be building Gitcoin. And I think to be a part of the broader regen movement, pro-social crypto movement. And this is just our small contribution to making that happen.
And quadratic funding, what is that at a high level?
So quadratic funding is a really powerful way to get people to fund what matters in their community. When you give $1 to a project with quadratic funding, it can actually mean up to $100 or sometimes even $1,000 worth of support for that project. The powerful thing about quadratic funding is that we're matching funds from the crowd with a central matching pool, but that match isn't based off of the amount that each project raises. It's based off of the breadth of the contributors. So basically, if I were to raise $10 from one contributor and you raise $10 from 10 contributors, if we were both in a matching pool with each other, you would get like 95% of the funding because even though we raised the same amount of funding, you got a broader base of support. So this is a really interesting way to get people to step out of the woodwork and fund causes in their community that they care about because the matching multiples are so high. So it's a new experiment in ways to fund what matters for communities. And Gitcoin's been one of the progenitors of getting quadratic funding used out there in the world.
Right. I think it's so powerful. And I think what we're seeing is that it really sets up a new primitive in the philanthropic space because foundations and traditional philanthropy can actually put funds into a matching pool round. And then the distribution is more led by the communities themselves rather than just, a board of trustees somewhere that's more separate or in the Ivy Tower.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we can do more scalable and precise and democratic capital allocation using these web-based primitives, sometimes on-chain primitives, than were possible before. And that's a really exciting design space for me. There's a lot of really important causes in the world, and the more that we can increase the velocity in which we're funding what matters, that's a high leverage point for solving these problems.
Got it. Okay, so 19 rounds under your belt. Roughly how much has been distributed over that time?
$60 million.
Amazing. And so there's the main Gitcoin core rounds that you're hosting, but then you have these community rounds. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so Gitcoin started as a centralized company, and we ran all aspects of the rounds and the software. And over time, we've been progressively decentralizing as many parts of that to the community as possible. Gitcoin's now a decentralized modular protocol through which the software runs, and that's been part of the progressive decentralization. The progressive decentralization of the Gitcoin Grants program has meant first running it in the DAO and then breaking it up into core and community rounds, and then just every round giving the community more and more opportunities to actually run the rounds. And this time around, we are decentralizing that even more by allowing the community to run even more aspects of the rounds. And I think that Jon and Ben are going to be a huge part of that.
Great. Okay, so Jon, what is your round? What are you guys up to?
Yeah. I'm one of the leaders of the Climate Coordination Network. And we are, as Kevin just described, we have decentralized what has been a climate funding round within Gitcoin for 8 rounds, going to the 9th round now, since GG 12, excuse me. And so we have been the team that was running that round within Gitcoin, and now we've moved and decentralized that round outside of Gitcoin. We've distributed $3 million in matching funds and another $1 million in crowdfunding over those 8 rounds. And so as a community round, I think what's really exciting is that Gitcoin now is empowering us to fund what matters to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the context of the Climate Coordination Network and the Climate Round, what matters to us is solving for climate change at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, and really in the Web3 context. So we're really looking to fund regenerative finance or refi projects who are using Web3 tools to solve for climate change at the end of the day. And so we're excited to continue on that journey. This is the second round that is fully decentralized, and we're also learning every round how to get better and how to support our community and of grantees and of donors.
Where are most of the projects coming from?
All over the world, but we are seeing really in the last couple of rounds more and more projects out of various parts of the African continent and LATAM are some of the more concentrated areas, but we are seeing international. I think not quite every continent, but we've got a map on our website, so you can find us climatecoordination.org, and we've got a map there that does at least the last round targets where all those grantees are to try and show that that really is a worldwide movement.
I got this next one. When Antarctica?
That was my next question. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of climate scientists who are doing work down there that could appreciate some more funding.
Yeah, there's probably some amazing work in like impact attestations that could be done down there in terms of the data that they're collecting down there, I would think.
And so Gitcoin Grants Round 20 runs April 23rd through May 7th.
Correct.
And you guys with CCN, Climate Coordination Network, are running simultaneous to that main round. And so if I'm a climate project and I apply and am accepted, then I'm eligible for portions of the matching pool. And during the round from April 23 through May 7, I go out to my community and I try to raise crowdfunding donations. So kind of like Kickstarter, Patreon, or GoFundMe, but just now on Web3 rails. And if I get more broader support, and depending on how much I raise and how many donors, that determines how much of the matching pool that I get from my project.
That's correct. We're really looking for the signal from the community to tell us where these funds should go. And so, yes, we empower all of the various grantees. For example, last round we had 100 grantees in the round. So we really empower them with as many tools as we can for them to go out to their communities, because the way that they, quote, win within a quadratic funding round is that they go out to their community and they get as many donations as they can. And those don't have to be huge donations.
Yep.
Those can be, 1,000 people giving $1, but all of that together is showing a signal that Project A has huge support from the community versus maybe Project B that only has 10 people that gave them $1.
And so if I'm contributing $1, it could be unlocking $3, $4, $5 for the project that I'm supporting.
Sure. And maybe more. And I think maybe one thing to touch on briefly is just that does somewhat create this popularity contest. In some respects, it's going out to the community and saying, who do you love the most? Go give them $1. And I think where we're trying to evolve, at least within CCN, but I think there's a movement in a lot of the community rounds and at Gitcoin to move towards both reputation systems and impact tracking systems that can really maximize for the dollar to impact ratio. Like that is really CCN's North Star, is how can we maximize the impact of, in this case, $300,000 we're going to give away in this round. How do we maximize the impact so that we're getting as much done with that $300,000 out in the world as we can? And so we look to see that we're going to evolve from this sort of popularity contest to, on top of that, then being able to track these grantees and really seeing, like, what are you doing in the world in the next 3 months when you come back to us in GG21? What have you really done with this funding, and what can you really show us as that impact?
Right.
So that's exciting direction we want to go, but I want to make sure we...
Yeah. And
I was going to say, I know that the OpenCivics round is also focusing on that as well. So maybe that's...
Actually, what I wanted to share in relationship to that is one of the things that happened in the last round that was one of the most exciting innovations for me, because as Kevin said, each round kind of stacks on the learnings from the previous one, was the community actually selected curators of projects for the different rounds. I don't know if that's happening again this time, but it was a really powerful signaling tool that functioned almost like liquid democracy, because I could sort of proxy my trust to someone in the community who I knew had done a really deep dive of studying all of the projects and all the different rounds. And Gitcoin made it really easy to just select add all to cart. And so then I could immediately fund projects that I knew someone else who I really trusted. I could delegate my trust to someone who is curating projects in the round. And I think that's
Nice.
mechanisms like that help avoid it being just a popularity contest by having trusted third parties who are doing the due diligence to research which projects should get funded.
So Benjamin, can you share at a high level what is OpenCivic and what you guys are doing with the round?
Yeah, so OpenCivics is a decentralized organization that is creating a solidarity network or a collaborative network amongst people who are innovating in the civic space. And Kevin's work and the work of Vitalik Buterin really brought the philosophy of public goods into my awareness. And as soon as that clicked for me, I suddenly saw the world differently, and I saw approaches to addressing these deeply entrenched systemic challenges differently. But then when I looked at the communities in the Web3 space that were using this term, I mostly saw decentralized finance applications. And I think there is powerful transformation that happens when we remove our dependency on the public goods of the banking system, and we actually have our own decentralized mechanisms for providing those core civic utilities to the public. But I saw how powerful that theory of change of focusing on public goods that addressed other aspects of coordination and governance and all of the kind of fundamental underlying civic utilities that a civilization requires to function, and that we could actually run our civilization through these more peer-to-peer distributed mechanisms. And so OpenCivics was created to serve people who are approaching these kinds of design challenges in this way, whether that's like creating infrastructure for local communities or in the regenerative space, whether that's through governance or tokenomics, or any number of different ways that empower people to essentially just coordinate the stewardship of their communities and our commons.
Right.
And so our round is, this round, we've done one previous one, and this one, we are also one of the community rounds that was selected by the community to be an official partner of Gitcoin this round. And we're focusing on a smaller number of projects in the round so that each project walks away with enough funding to really do some meaningful portion of work that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Sometimes projects can walk away with such a small amount of funding that it's hard to do impact attestations, is what we discovered, is that if you're only getting a few $100s, the impact might be meaningful, but it's hard to measure because it might just be keeping your Google Suite turned on for your team for the month. And so we wanted to have a smaller number of projects with a larger amount of funding so that we can experiment with these impact attestation frameworks to start developing a ledger of the impact that these projects are having to help them be able to show other funders in the future. We received this $5,000 grant and we were able to do all of these things with it. Could we use that as a track record to build up credibility to go for a $30,000 grant or a $100,000 grant?
Amazing. And how much is the matching pool that is going to be happening during GG20?
Our matching pool is about $40,000 in total. And so that's in part why we're keeping it to 5 to 10 projects. And our last round was about 25,000. And so we're hoping to continue to grow the matching pool over time.
Got it. Well, I guess now's a good time to say that we're also running around through Ma Earth. We're specifically focusing on regenerative land projects, so things that are place-based and really in contact with the soil or the watershed or some sort of community land project. And we're not a community round as part of the Gitcoin, but I guess one of the things that's been so powerful about this Gitcoin decentralization roadmap and really approaching it as a protocol is it's permissionless, and so anyone can run around. And so we spun up a round, we use the tool, and we don't have to ask for permission, so to speak, to do that. And Kevin, I mean, you started with open source software. We just talked about climate. We just talked about civic participation and infrastructure. Regenerative land projects. What else are you seeing, and how does this marry with the vision of Gitcoin that it's not just going to be Web3 tooling, but really a wide spectrum of funding mechanisms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think first off, like I just want to first recognize that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, not only the first generation of technological visionaries that gave us the internet, but also the people who are building consensus protocols, Satoshi Nakamoto for giving us Bitcoin, Vitalik and the researchers that he surrounds himself with for giving us consensus mechanisms, solving the Byzantine generals problem and giving us programmable money. Like, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. But, I think that Gitcoin is just basically trying to build a toolkit that allows communities to fund what matters to them. And, I think that there's a broad spectrum of reasons why people would want to do that. Right now, we're talking about the Gitcoin Grants program and things that I think are attributed with regen or with social and economic justice. And I think those are all really important causes. And on the other end of the spectrum is sort of like more pure capitalistic things that we have ecosystems that are just trying to fund their open source software, are trying to build liquidity tools and better research for their ecosystems. And so one of the beautiful things about quadratic funding and Gitcoin grants is just how adaptable it is to any different community that wants to fund what matters to it, whether it's something that's like a moral good or like an economic good, and that whole spectrum. And so my sort of, on the long arc of where I'd like to see Gitcoin go is that this cycle, we're going to enable every L2, every LRT, every project that has hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars of capital. We're going to unlock those treasuries and get it to people who are building those ecosystems. But what if we could reach an escape velocity and these tools could go into the mainstream by 2030 or 2035, and all of a sudden you've got nonprofits that would have been allocating capital in an undemocratic and inefficient way in the past, now using tools like Gitcoin grants to unlock the capital in a more democratic, scalable and precise way. And so that's where I like to see us go, and how I thread the needle between the economic goods and the moral goods. And Gitcoin grants is just sort of like our laboratory for practicing it right now. And I would really like to get to a point in which we're scaling up these grants rounds 10x from where they are now, so that they can truly start allowing people to focus full time on these causes. But we're just not there yet, but we've got to be patient, iterate, keep trying to do it.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned $60 million distributed, which is a lot and is still a drop in the bucket relative to the $3 trillion market cap of the crypto space. So you alluded to L2s and LRTs, layer 2s and liquid restaking tokens, these kind of protocols in the crypto and Web3 space that do have large treasuries of funds and are trying to find mechanisms for distribution and incentive alignment that's also consistent with the ethos of crypto and decentralization and peer-to-peer and permissionless and transparent protocols. And so, I think from my side, looking at this space as an observer, it's poised for tremendous continued growth. Like, it feels like product market fit is there, the momentum is there. And I want to ask you guys a bit about the challenges. We alluded to the popularity contest kind of, critique of quadratic funding. For me, like, the experience of talking to land projects and trying to get people on board, it's all user experience. And a lot of it has, the issue of just getting crypto to begin with, getting into an exchange. I live in New Zealand. We have different exchange options that we aren't really enabled for. And just getting over that step to get gas in the wallet has been like stage one, problem one. And it's a solvable problem for the projects, but then they have to go out to their communities and they have to raise funds. So how do you guys think about this, particular UX issue? And then maybe we'll ask about some of the other challenges.
Yeah. So first off, these are completely valid challenges, and Gitcoin is not perfect. Just writing good software is hard to do, and then doing it while you're a DAO, I think, is like extra hard mode. And so I just want to recognize that there's been some missteps over the last couple of years, and there's been bugs in the UI that I'm not proud of. But also we tried to turn a company into a DAO, and that's like pretty momentous that we're on the other side of that now. So that's cool.
Nice work.
My strategy so this is actually not announced. We might be actually just dropping it on this podcast, but like, The sort of vision for scaling out Gitcoin software is to follow a modular software development thesis, and this is what's known as the Unix philosophy: build software that does one thing well and is designed to be interoperable with other programs. And this is a really profound way of building software, because it means that you can really just build software that does one thing well and not have to worry about things outside of that, if you've allowed it to be interoperable with other programs. And so, the thing I'll say in response to your example of people in New Zealand not being able to contribute to your project, which, by the way, that breaks my heart, is that what I would like to do is enable any builder who is experiencing this pain to build a checkout flow for Gitcoin Grants Round 21 that accepts whatever currency. Let's say, I'm sorry, I don't know what the name of New Zealand dollars are. New Zealand dollars. Okay, cool. All right.
You got it.
So yeah, basically like a checkout flow that accepts fiat, that accepts, New Zealand dollars, that accepts anything. And so I think there's a recognition, and it's like a humbling recognition, that the Gitcoin dev team can't solve all these problems. And but by giving the other people the tools to build modular tools that do them, and hopefully giving them a little bit of funding to solve those problems, that will eventually be able to solve them more. So in the meantime, in GG20, send a support request if you're having issues. Reach out to your program administrator if you're having issues, and if you're not getting what you need from them, DM me on Twitter. I'm at Owocki, and I'll go like flip over a table internally or something like that, and make sure that we don't F it up too bad. But I'd say that we're deeply evolutionary, and we're trying to get better all the time, and we haven't solved the problems yet, but we'll iterate towards it.
Yeah, and if you're contributing to the Ma-Earth Grants Round, we're support@maearth.com, where we're also going to be staffing the customer support to help people with onboarding, because it's such a crucial piece of this. And the good news is I think once you get on chain, it becomes much easier. And certainly the experience of contributing to Grants Round, whatever, 10, and paying $60 of gas fees, and now it's 2 cents. We're seeing this kind of iterative and sometimes accelerating improvement in the infrastructure across the board, Gitcoin and across Web3. How do you guys think about it?
I think first it's important to realize that many of the challenges are not a Gitcoin challenge.
Right.
This is a crypto Web3 challenge. So it certainly shouldn't all be laid on Gitcoin if things are not working. And I think you're pointing to a lot of the struggles that we see because, we talked a little bit about where some of our grantees are. Just locationally, there are a lot of challenges, both from an education standpoint of like some of these projects they're not tech companies at all. If you're a project that your core focus is doing regenerative agriculture and planting trees, it can be a huge hurdle just to apply to the round, let alone to get your community onboarded in order to be able to support you in your round. And so I don't think that Gitcoin is gatekeeping that. I think that the technology is still, to some extent, gatekeeping certain people from being involved. This technology is truly, even though it is a borderless technology, it is not available to all yet. It's not easy enough. But tools are getting better all the time, and I think that every round, Gitcoin is going to continue to, add on all of the tools that are being built in all the other contexts. I think this idea of modularity and how all these tools can stack together, that's something that I think Gitcoin has done very well in both building the Lego blocks that make sense to make the grant stack and all of the other products work, but also seeing that, we could strap on this new tool that somebody else is building and make this piece better and strap on this tool. And I think that's, so I see where we're headed, but I also day to day deal with, people in telegrams that are just like, I just want to apply, I want to apply and I just can't figure this out. The MetaMask is not working. I can't bridge funds over to Arbitrum. I can't,
don't get me started on bridging.
Yeah, I was going to say, we could go down a rabbit hole of what's not working, but I think, to continue also to bring it back to what is working, like this modularity also provides us with tools to not only on the QF front, but also new strategies for capital allocation that we can take advantage of over time, whether it is, CCN running some retroactive funding rounds in the future, some kind of streaming QF. There's a lot of exciting new types of funding mechanisms that that we can take advantage of because of these modular tools that Gitcoin's building.
Yeah, that's another direction we'll be so building for better user experience for non-crypto natives is one direction to build in. And then building more weird frontier capital allocation mechanisms is another. And like the fact that quadratic funding, like at least to crypto natives, quadratic funding isn't even interesting anymore. It's like 4 years old. But the fact that we can do more weird niche stuff than that is, I think, a very exciting opportunity. And because we've enabled this modular architecture, we can pursue both at once. And by we, I mean the royal we. I mean the broader Gitcoin network can do it. So excited about that too.
Can you kind of touch on what some of those other funding mechanisms besides quadratic funding might look like?
Yeah, so one that's really hot in the ecosystem right now is called retroactive public goods funding. And basically the mechanism there, by the way, this is pioneered by Optimism, and we've partnered with them to make it available to more people. But retroactive public goods funding is basically a way of setting aside a matching pool similar to quadratic funding, but it's allocated by a set of what are called badge holders, which is basically they are the capital allocators in that ecosystem, and they get to select projects that they think are good in that ecosystem, and then the amount that's allocated from the matching pool is the median of all of the aggregated ballots across all the projects. So basically, it's a less democratic way of doing things, and that makes it less of a popularity project or popularity contest. But it's also a little bit more technocratic in that you can just elect people who are experts in the field to do the capital allocation, and so. That's a model that has become really very powerful and exciting for a lot of people in the space. And I think the reason is that you can think about a spectrum of someone who's a central power broker administering the funds, and then quadratic funding, which is anyone in your ecosystem can allocate the funds. And retroactive public goods funding is kind of in the middle. Because it's these badge holders. But you can round over round, you can give out more and more badge holders, so you can iterate towards more democratic capital allocation over time. So,
and you're alluding to the kind of curation of projects or the distillation of how many funds go to projects, that decision-making process. But also the key distinction is that retroactive is backward, right?
Sure. So one spectrum is how democratic is the capital allocation. And then another part of the spectrum is, are you rewarding funds retroactively or proactively? And retroactive public goods funding operates on this idea that you should only fund things that have been goods in the past. It's easier to see what public goods were good with the benefit of hindsight than to speculate on in the future. And also, by the way, if we're dropping tens of millions of dollars to public goods in the future, there will be proactive funding markets where people will speculate on that will evolve in reaction to the retroactive public goods funding. This sounds like word salad, but it's like proactive funding for retroactive projects. Those two things would evolve together. So yeah, I just think of this as like a 2x2 space where one axis is democratic versus technocratic, and the other is proactive versus retroactive. And we're going to crisscross all these things in the future.
Benjamin, you've had some great Twitter threads on these and more. Jump in here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think relative to the challenges and the issues that we've been talking about, I see it mostly in terms of the trade-offs of what the alternatives are. And that is why I've stayed in this space for so long, is that I've kind of gone back to legacy philanthropy and seen how inefficient it is, how unable it is to take risks. And I think we're at a time in our kind of collective journey as a species where the kinds of things that really need to be funded right now are things that are almost not legible to some of these legacy systems. And so the people who are invested in Web3, I've found, are very systems-oriented thinkers, and they're also innovators, and they're willing to take risks, and they're willing to push the envelope and look under the hood of things that we kind of take for granted, as this is just how society works. But Web3 as a kind of a substrate of innovating new systems, those people who are attracted to that are thinking through the design issues with the way that our systems are currently designed. And there's a ton of evolutionary iteration that's happening in the space right now. And I think that is actually necessary in order to avoid some of these collapse scenarios that people like Daniel Schmachtenberger talk about all the time. It's like that is on the horizon. In some parts of the world are actually already experiencing it, and we're just privileged enough to not be experiencing it right now here. And so there is a kind of immediacy to why this matters and why funding what matters and taking these risks and thinking systemically is so important. And that's why I'm willing to deal with, buggy UX issues, because that's
Wait,
what.
did you just point at me?
I was gesturing broadly.
I plead guilty. We have some bugs sometime. But email support@gitcoin.co if you have any issues.
I think the Gitcoin community, I mean, you're the first to be self-critical about it all, Kevin, but I think you guys have been doing a phenomenal job improving round after round, doing it in the open and transparently, and making these tools available so that more of us can join in and just start to experiment and play and bring people along. I also wanted to say I really resonate with what you just shared, Benjamin, and in the environmental space or kind of climate, ecological space. Two of the ideas that have claws in my brain on this. One is around, we're seeing this shift from just carbon tunnel vision into a broader recognition of the importance of biodiversity, for example. And then these statistics get batted around. They're almost cliche now. 4% of land stewardship by indigenous peoples being 80% of remaining biodiversity on the planet. And I'm like, okay, well, what's our retroactive public goods funding strategy for biodiversity right now? And how does that shift the conversation about centering indigenous land stewardship and actually thinking more about, making sure that we're getting funds to those who are preserving intact ecosystems already, rather than just forward-looking, additionality-based carbon credit models. So I think that idea alone has like hundreds of billions of dollars of funding profundity, associated with it. And the other would be, what I'm witnessing in a lot of these conversations about regenerative finance outside of the crypto space is just a continual perpetuation of patterns that are top-down and centralizing. And there's a movement afoot around bioregional financing, and kind of biofi was a term that Samantha Powers just shared with me last night. And, essentially making sure that as we have these huge amounts of capital going into the climate space, that we're actually building these different types of funding patterns and facilities to make sure that they can be bioregionally or communally or based on watershed, pick your, place-based location of choice. Making sure that the funds distribution is done more like that. And that's exactly what this kind of Gitcoin, mycelial, retroactive, quadratic, all the different types of grant making tools can enable. Thoughts?
Just to paint a picture of where I think this is headed is, tax day is coming up, and people are thinking about the money that they're sending to the federal government and how is that allocated and how undemocratic is that process. Even though we supposedly live in a democracy,
right,
there's very little that we have to say around how those resources are allocated. And so as we start looking at bioregional finance, place-based QF, I really see a future of democracy where I take my tax dollars and I put them towards a government-sponsored matching pool that allocates community funds directly to stewardship of my community, whether that's education or reforestation or watershed stewardship and management. These are the kinds of like localized use cases of this technology that I see as being the horizon that we're headed towards.
I see. I think you're right that right now we do have this top-down funding model where there's billions of dollars that are going to impact work at the top of a funnel and then just trickling out the bottom at the local level and just barely making an impact in many cases because of the inefficiencies in that coordination of that capital from from that high level down to the low level. And I think that with all of these tools, we're building all of these modular Legos that are starting to build these systems where we can begin to flip that funnel upside down to where we can tell these people, no, put the money in this little hole, and we will coordinate that capital for maximum efficiency, for maximum impact out to all of the areas where it needs to go, all to the communities where it needs to go. And so that's where I think we're headed, climate change in particular is one of the world's largest coordination failures. And I think that programmable money provides us a way to coordinate capital to the things that matter and to really solve for the world's problems. And that's why I'm here and why I do this, and devote, for as long as I'm for as long as it seems like this is a way to solve these problems. I think that these tools are so powerful, and when we do hit that 2030 2035, like, it's not going to happen tomorrow. I wish that it was, but we're not there. But I think we're building on top of our everything day in and day out, year after year, to where this is going to become more mainstream. And I really think that this can make a tremendous, have a huge impact in the way that capital is allocated, particularly in the impact and philanthropic space.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's 3 threads that I see creating a convergence, just building on top of what Ben and Jon said. The first is looking forward to the day when we finally end the gerontocracy, the rule by our elders. It'd be nice to have some Gen Xers and millennials in power.
They're not real elders.
Yeah, well, they're older. In that sense, they're elders. And so in that generational turnover, in the generational turnover, I'm excited about what's going to be possible in creating more digital democracy tools. But I also think that we should not forget the lessons of World War II. Like, there were some genuine atrocities that happened in World War II, and I would not like to have those repeated. So anyway, ending the gerontocracy will create a new generation of more web native people in power, and I think that that will create the opportunity to build new systems for hopefully upgrading democracy to the digital age. I don't know. The flip side of that is maybe we'll just have digital authoritarianism and surveillance states. I don't know. We're on a knife's edge on that one. The second is collapse scenarios and just pushing up planetary boundaries, and not just planetary boundaries, but socio-economical boundaries, things not only climate change and biodiversity collapse and coral reef destruction, but also AI taking jobs and now no one can feed their families. There's a lot of boundary scenarios that we're hitting, and then the third thing is new belief in bottoms-up coordination mechanisms, bottoms-up coordination, relocalization of people's communities, and just working together as communities again. And I include things like mutualistic peer-to-peer credit and community experiments with things like quadratic funding, and I include blockchains in that category, which is sort of unconventional in a way, but so it's the convergence of ending the gerontocracy and these collapse scenarios and the necessity coming from that, and increased belief in peer-to-peer coordination that I think all of this stuff co-evolves in the next decade. And the big thing I think about is are we ready to meet the moment of the power shifts that will happen and the demand that we're going to have to fund what matters and do it bottoms up and scalable? Are we going to be ready to meet that moment? And I don't know the answer, but I think we can try to step on the gas by working on these things and rallying around this movement together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I sometimes feel like the work that I'm doing is creating lifeboats for collapse scenarios.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think collectively we have been codependent on large institutions. And I think you saw that with FTX. That was my big takeaway of the big collapse of that organization was people didn't want to take responsibility for managing their own coins. And so they offloaded that onto an institution, because I think we've just inherited this learned helplessness of this big thing will take care of it, so I don't need to worry about it.
It's big. How could it fail?
Yeah. And so it just works. And as long as it just works, we don't, even if it's failing us, we because it's so much to take responsibility for our communities and our commons in addition to working a full-time job and raising a family. But I see that as those big institutions start crumbling and failing more and more and more, it will be a necessity for us to steward our communities and commons directly peer-to-peer. And so even if that's not today or tomorrow, these kinds of tools and this localization movement and the way that blockchain is perfectly designed for groups of peers to coordinate together, that will be at some point, we won't have a choice. And so we're creating that infrastructure now.
One other yes and that I have on top of that is Nathan Schneider once said to me, Nathan Schneider, professor of media studies at Colorado, said to me, like, social media is a peer-to-peer movement, but it can only deconstruct power systems and deconstruct institutions, but it can't hold power. So the real challenge of the internet is to do peer-to-peer, but to build systems that can hold power and help us coordinate, not just destruct existing institutions and social movements. And we're like 15 years into social media just decimating the legitimacy and the faith that we have in all of our existing institutions, but we haven't pioneered the new institutions that can hold power. And so, I think it's incumbent upon us to accelerate the coordination mechanisms that we're building here and get them to a place where they can hold power, because we need that if we're going to coordinate web scale humanity, but also local based communities.
And Kevin, for someone who's still like a blockchain skeptic or newbie, why does this crypto Web3 on-chain blockchain revolution actually create the enabling conditions for that ability to create, centers of power or decentralized protocols of power? What's different? Is it just the transparency of having a shared ledger?
There's a part of me that's like, I don't know, if you've already made up your mind, then like, who am I to try to change your mind? Like, I don't know. There's the whole Satoshi quote of like, if you can't figure it out or you don't get it, like, who am I to try to convince you? Like, there's a little bit of like, of that where, it's like, okay, if you already made up your mind, then I'm not going to convince you. But if you've got an open mind, then I guess what I would say to you is that, like, listen, the financial system was built after World War II in the 1950s on what's now really old technology, and it was built to give the U.S. dollar a position of hegemony. And it's time to upgrade the system. And blockchain is a way to build more transparent, efficient, global way money, and to allow anyone to program their values in their money. So it's like a rich place for experimentation. And so that's how I think about it. And then, the question that always comes up is like, well, Kevin, what about all the scams? And, it's true, there are scams in crypto, but, we're giving people the ability to program their values into their money, okay? So that's a double-edged sword. And just like how we've got freedom of speech, and you could be a fucking like Nazi douchebag, but you still have freedom of speech. Like, I think the ability to program your values into your money is like this profound thing where it can be like really bad or really, really good, but it's still like a foundational thing. And so what I would say is, if you've got an open mind, which, maybe you do, maybe you don't, then, you wouldn't throw out the internet because of a couple bad websites. Don't throw out all of crypto because of Scam Bankman-Fried. Like
you're the most OG around this table, and I sense you've had to deal with a lot of skeptics over the years.
Yeah, I don't had to deal with. I don't know, like they're in my Twitter mentions. It doesn't really affect me day to day, but it's just like, I don't know. I guess that's the decision tree. It's like, do you have an open mind or not? And if you do, like, just think of it as a decentralized movement. And like the internet's got bad stuff on it, but you don't stop using the internet because of like the dark web or anything like that. So I think you just have to frame people from looking at crypto like a monolith to looking at it as a diaspora of a bunch of different things. And also for them to know that it's inevitable. Like, this technology is not going in the box,
right?
Or back into the box.
Right.
And there is also this ratchet effect. I'm really glad you mentioned free speech, because, for the first person that they deplatformed was Alex Jones. And that was a coordinated effort of big tech companies to take him off the air. And it's Alex Jones. You're like, yeah, that guy, it makes sense that he would be removed from those platforms. But the way that ratchet works is it starts with the person that everyone is kind of like, yeah, they shouldn't have that access to that platform. But then we can see that once that precedent is set, it only gets more extreme from there. And so it's, the ACLU used to be defending the rights of Nazis to march in streets. And that was because it matters that right is universal. And as we start to see more and more breakdowns in systems happening, we're going to need large-scale social movements that are able to respond to that. And it's very probable that if a movement were to gain enough real power to really threaten some of the power systems that would not want to see things change at a deep level, that those people would be able to be deplatformed. They would be able to have their financial services taken away, their voice on social media taken away. And by building on top of this permissionless, peer-to-peer, decentralized technology, it's actually ensuring that as we build social power for the movements that really matter right now, that once we start to get really successful as movements, that power won't be able to be taken away.
Well said.
Yeah. I think it's tough to make the case to a crypto skeptic about that, though, because like no one comes home at the end of the day and says my day was too centralized, or like until you get deplatformed, like you have the Black Swan event, you don't think about it, right? And I think it's just like, I don't know, the thing that's like everyday, like blue collar Americans who are just trying to make ends meet, like I think you have to hit them in their pocketbooks. And so my vision, and this like intersects with Gitcoin's vision, is like eventually I want everyday people across the world to receive crypto economic rewards for doing good in their community, because then they're not only hitting them in the pocketbooks, but they're also doing good in their community, and that creates an upward spiral of community engagement and collective action locally. And so, I think the decentralization argument is like it's like a good one from a political theory perspective, but most people day to day just like don't give a shit until it happens to them. So I don't know, like multiple levels, but a yes and on top of what you said.
Yeah. And what Gitcoin's enabling, what Ethereum's enabling, what now many chains and experiments are enabling is new token value distribution to bring people in. It's not just a negative, oh, I'm using this because I don't want to get deplatformed. It's also a positive of, hey, this is a new opportunity for more funding flows, more financial security against inflation, more, resourcing for my family or my community.
Yeah. I mean, it depends heavily on the token. Like, there's a big difference between like,
dog with hat tokens.
ETH and dog with hat, I'd say. But if you're in Argentina or you're in Zimbabwe and you have hyperinflation, the access to US dollars is literally a life changer for you, because now you can save money in a currency that's not going to be debased, and you can plan for the future and build a better future for your family. Like, I don't think us in the first world really understand how privileged we are to have access to currencies that aren't constantly being debased.
I want to ask one more question, which is just to give a shout out to Funding the Commons and Earth Commons. What brings you guys here? What are you hoping to get out of the event? We just kicked off this morning.
I was just here in the Bay for the Bioneers gathering.
Right.
And this feels to me like a Web3 or a technologically and systemically gripped in Bioneers.
Totally.
And
I was just saying that last night. I was like, it's just like Pioneers, but the tech version.
And I love the OGs, and like Bioneers feels like it's OG in the climate space, and also platforming indigenous voices in the climate space, which I think is really important and necessary. But I really feel at home amongst people who are builders, people who are taking the reins of these technologies and designing systems, and not just talking about what the problems are, but really like building bottom-up solutions that create different incentives and align coordination around these really critical challenges. That's why I'm here.
Nice. What about you, Jon?
Well, this is, I think, the third Funding the Commons that I've been a part of. And I traveled to a lot of different crypto conferences, but I love that at Funding the Commons in general, that it really does bring it back to like real world cases in a lot of the discussions. And it's always felt a little more academic than some conferences. So I find just the quality of the content tends to be high and well produced.
High signal from noise.
Exactly. So, but also knew that plenty of friends and new friends would be here. So that plays into it too.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I think Funding the Commons has been a mainstay in what I'll call the regen Web3 space for the last couple of years. And I mean, I just think of it as a Schelling point for people who are doing great work in the space to meet each other and bounce off each other. And off of that creates new ideas and new synthesis and new relationships that are going to propagate the movement forward. So creating commonality of place and of purpose is what events like this create. And I also just want to give a shout out to Protocol Labs and Juan Benet for believing in this vision. And there's a version of the world in which they didn't have to do all this like regen Funding the Commons stuff, and I'm just extremely thankful to them for spending capital and time and attention on it, because I think it's very important.
Yeah, Yeah, echoing that for sure. Good job, Protocol Labs. Okay, so the invitation is to apply and donate to Gitcoin Grants Round 20 and the community rounds. How do we find out about OpenCivics?
Yeah, you can go to opencivics.co/grants if you want to learn about our grants. But everything about OpenCivics as an organization, if you're a civic innovator or if we have a very expanded definition of what civics is. So anyone who's building tools that support communities to coordinate around the commons can find more about us at opencivics.co.
Great. And how do people follow you and OpenCivics on Twitter?
Yep, on Twitter, it's at OpenCivics, and I am at Omni Harmonic.
Great. What about you, Jon? CCN, Climate Coordination Network.
Yeah. You can learn all about our round at climatecoordination.org. There's a portal there that has all the information about the round, but also a lot of great resources for both for any grantees out there that are still applying to the round at this point, or if you're a donor and you're looking to support your favorite projects, a lot of good resources there. You can find us at climate_program on Twitter, and then you can find me at JH Ruth.
Great.
JHRUTH.
I was enjoying the recipe book that you guys have around climate impact and the different metrics.
The metrics garden. And that's actually modeled again after some of the work done in optimism, and Lao Now Mu is started that work in optimism, and we've begun to adopt that. Just to quickly touch on that, it's a way that we're trying to show our grantees how they can begin to really quantify their impact of their project. And so that's sort of our first move towards this impact equals profit meme that we're working on meming into existence.
Nice. And just acknowledgement to you for the support on the Ma Earth grants.
Of course.
Once we started to get set up, Jon reached out to me on Twitter and helped us tweak a few things to really get things polished. And I just love that kind of coordinative, transparent, collaborative spirit and ethos, being a first time round operator and, having support from people who've done it before. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you for jumping in and using the technology. Love to see it spreading. And certainly for any of the grantees that are applying for Ma Earth's round, you're likely eligible for the climate round as well, and vice versa in some cases. So I hope long term we can continue to collaborate in future rounds in an even deeper level.
Yeah, because there's this network effect, and that's another key potential benefit for projects inside of these grants rounds is that you're tapping into more funders, more matching pools, more momentum all around. Kevin, final words and shout out to how people can get involved in Gitcoin Grants Round 20.
Sure. So Gitcoin Grants Round 20, you can go to grants.gitcoin.co and contribute. I think if you Google Gitcoin, I think we're finally at a point where Google doesn't autocorrect Gitcoin to Bitcoin. So that's good. You can find us there. You can find me at twitter.com/Owocki. I'm mostly shit post, but sometimes I'll post about Gitcoin and there'll be nuggets there. I also host a podcast called the Green Pill Podcast, which is all about building pro-social positive sum games on crypto. So you can check out greenpill.network if you want to get access to that, and basically just kind of like doing research on different ways that people are doing impactful work in the space. But final words, I think, this is a broad social movement, and I think that there's this energy that's hard to articulate here, but it feels like we're working on something that's already important and impactful and meaningful, but it's also just like bursting at the seams with potential energy that could get much bigger. And I'm hopeful that we're building something systemically important for the world here. So just my gratitude to you for hosting this, to all of us, to the crew behind the cameras and the people who are running the funding the commons, and just the whole movement feels like there's a lot of in-choate potential here. So I think that this is a movement, and we should be focused on supporting each other and advancing the movement forward. So can't wait to do this at Funding the Commons in 2025 and see how far we've come.
Awesome. All right. So all of the links are going to be in the show notes for all the resources that we just mentioned. The Ma Earth Grants Round is at maearth.com/grants. Thanks so much to the guests, and onwards we go. Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us. Appreciate you all.